Okay, everyone, thanks for coming to the contributor QA session. So this panel is basically about development topics around the virtualization stack, KVM, QEMU, and we have people that work on various layers of the stack and are contributors and or maintainers. But I have to admit, this session is going to suck if you don't post questions. We have some questions to get us started, but we're really relying on you guys to post things that you want to know. So we'll get started, but please just go to this URL and you can post any questions you want. And then this will be fun. So yeah. I'll get started with introducing everyone. So can we please go around for the panelists, just say your name, the company you work for, and maybe the components that you're involved in.
Sure. My name's Peter Feiner. I work for Google, and I'm involved, at least upstream, with KVM proper on x86, mostly with the MMU code, and the rest of the stack, Google kind of has its in-house version, so we don't use QEMU or OpenStack and all that.
Hello, my name is Wanpeng. I work for Tencent Cloud. I contribute to something like adaptive hot pooling, parallel virtualize the TLB shutdown, exit-less API, and VM, and I will also optimize the latency, something like that. Yeah, thank you.
Hello, my name's Peter Maydell. I work for ARM and also Linaro, and I work on QEMU basically. I do maintenance of all the ARM bits of QEMU and also some of the general project maintenance and admin stuff like merging everybody else's pull requests.
Hi, my name is Cornelia Huck. I work for Red Hat. I'm the overall SV90 QEMU maintainer, but I'm also doing SV90 work for KVM, and I'm also looking into VIRTIO and VFO stuff.
Hello, I'm Christian Borntraeger, and you probably just saw me in the presentation before. I also work for SV90, more on the kernel side of things. And, yeah.
Okay, so thanks for introducing yourselves. By the way, this is just their personal opinion, so they're not representing their company here, and they're free to say whatever they want to say. Okay, Emacs versus VI is going to be at the end. We're not going to start with that.
The answer is clear. It's obviously Emacs.
Okay.
Unless you use VI, of course.
Okay, so let's get started with, in your experiences, what are the biggest challenges with the KVM API? Not everyone has to answer. We can just go around, whoever has thoughts on this.
Maybe some of the legacy stuff that is still around. Sometimes stuff was introduced, for example, with x86 in mind, and then you try to extend it to other architectures, and it does not quite fit. That is sometimes a problem, but not always. The newer APIs are usually quite nice.
Yeah, I mean, we have several APIs in KVM that grew over time. We have basically a lot of new I/O controls from release to release, not a lot, but we have a steady flow of new I/O controls over time. Alex Graf did actually quite a good job to try things that try to minimize that. So we have, for example, the one rec interface, or we have the device interface, and that actually helps to reduce the number of new I/O controls, but this is still something that is growing over time, growing more. There's lots of architecture-specific things, and there is a danger that these interfaces are not very well reviewed, I guess.
I wouldn't call it a challenge. I'd say a success of the MM API, the kind of the set memory region, and the mapping of the user space mappings to guest physical addresses. That's been very robust. I've been using that to implement all kinds of crazy memory management, whether it's on the host side or host side stuff, like migration, post copy, before any kind of post copy was supported, and that's a brilliant API. Really love it.
Okay, thank you. I guess a related question is, there have been attempts to do something that's not an IOCTL API, and to expose things in sysfs and so on. What are your thoughts about about the evolution of the KVM API.
So one part of the KVM API where we being Google have forked, and we ought to converge and contribute back is exporting statistics from KVM. So we've implemented just like a binary, here's the key and get the value, because we were spending single-digit percentage time sometimes polling and getting high-frequency stats, and that's something silly that you shouldn't be doing. So parsing text, that's no good. So yeah, actually we took something that's upstream is a like nice, easy, human, consumable, non-ioctal thing and turned it into a dirty binary ioctal to make it more efficient. Opposite direction.
Right. We have actually interfaces in KVM. For example, the KVM start interfaces is exposed via debugfs. And I don't know who of you actually followed the K Summit to discuss mailing list that is basically proposing topics for the kernel summit. And there was a discussion about actually not mounting debugfs at all because it should not be there in a production environment. And we are exposing our statistics via the interface. So we might have to actually get rid of that, or at least find a better solution for that. So it's it turns out that our octals are working pretty well. I know that there have been tries to remove these some years ago, but it's not that easy to replace it with something better.
Okay, thank you.
One more comment I'll add. So a big part of my job is kind of just talking to people about KVM or mentoring junior engineers. And I've gotten to the point where I just call the ioctals system calls. It's just like we have a whole big family of KVM system calls. That's basically what they are.
All right, thank you. So let's shift gears. I think there is going to be a cluster of questions about how to deal with emails, how do you keep sane, reviewing patches, maybe what tools do you use? Do you have like a very scripted environment where you have custom scripts? How do you keep up with the KVM mailing list, with the QEMU mailing list?
Well, you should ask how you can keep up with LKML, but yeah, but you don't. Basically, I'm using Close as my email client, and when I have something incoming, I always rely on patches that are important to me, that I'm being CC'd on them. So I have them actually in my inbox, I can mark them, I see the follow-ups, and I'm usually waiting a bit if there's a discussion around it, if there's already review, and I only jump in if it's really something I feel I need to do. So that's one way of keeping sane, just keep on the sidelines, rely on the usual suspects already flushing out the big problems and so on. That's quite helpful, but basically living on my email client for much of the time.
So I use Gmail for my email, which is like an absolutely terrible email client for dealing with open source mailing lists, but you can just about make it work. It's like add a grease monkey script so that you can get fixed with fonts, which is like people have been griping at Google for not providing this feature for like a decade now, but you can work around it. And then I just sort of scan through the fire hose of stuff to find the stuff I care about. I don't think I'd recommend it as an approach unless you are actually doing this as like your job the whole week, because if you're just trying to dip in and out, then it's not going to work. But if you need to look at most of this stuff anyway, it kind of works. For actually applying patches, there is the Patchu is quite good. The Patchwork website is also quite useful for this sort of thing. And there's a tool called Patches, which is a thing that was originally written by Anthony Liguori that basically allows you to, from the command line, say, apply this patch, and you can give it a message ID, or you can search for stuff with it. So you can kind of, even if your email client is not so good at the sort of apply this thing from my email client, you can still, there's some useful command line tools and websites out there for being able to work with this stuff. It's not great, but it's kind of functional.
Just let me second the usefulness of Patchu. It's very helpful to just keep track of things and see if something not even applies or if there are already reviews and so on.
I will will create a email. I will create a filter in my email client to filter the email from LKML. As you know, there are tons of email there. But for KVM mailing list, I will go through the just the x86 patches and review and give comments. Yeah.
I don't stay appraised of what's going on the mailing list day to day or even week by week. I rely on stuff getting CC'd to me directly or my colleagues telling me, hey, you should look at this. And I pray for the day that you all drink the Kool-Aid and start using something other than email for patches.
Google Plus, maybe.
To be honest, I think the difficulty with moving away from email is the transition, basically. So if somebody comes up with a website that sort of looks a bit like, I don't know, any one of these tools for doing code review on a website that can interact with the stock patch email workflow so that people can say, if I like the website, I'll use the website. If I want to use email, I'll continue to use email and have these two groups of people still manage to interact relatively seamlessly. That's a much easier sell than we're going to uproot the whole community and move them forcibly to GitHub or move them forcibly to Fabricator or whatever. You can do that if you really want to do that, but you've got to be really, really sure that the tool you're moving to is sufficiently good that you can actually say to this enormous community, yeah, we're going to uproot all your workflows and we're going to make you do something different.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I would add is it depends on whether you want to work offline or not. Because some of these tools that have been mentioned, they can actually pull down all the emails, all the patches, and you can then just work without internet connectivity if you're traveling or whatever. So that's one of the conveniences of some of these tools. And that can be quite useful for getting through a lot of work without constantly being online.
I think I have some comments on Peter's opinion regarding the transition will be hard. There's a similar discussion always going on also for the kernel community, and they actually made a statement. It might be actually possible to use something else, but it has always been. It must still be possible to accept changes via email. So as long as the email way is still possible as a fallback, then it's actually easier to try new things. But some kind of hard transition will be really hard.
Yeah. And in particular, if you do a hard transition, then it's quite hard to go back again because you've then got another hard transition. So even if you switch over to something else and it turns out, well, it's got some problems, then you're kind of stuck with where you wound up. So.
Just wanted to add that all the systems out there are also email-based. That doesn't matter. It's just Garrett is also email-based, for example.
Okay, so the comment was that Garrett is also email-based, so there are other systems out there that are email-based. So Paulo posted a follow-up question to this. He said, what are the advantages and disadvantages of patch management tools? Do you guys want to talk about that, or yeah, maybe?
Paula, do you mean compared to non-email stuff, or are we gonna?
Yeah, well, I think that's an interesting topic.
The current versus the Kool-Aid.
The Kool-Aid, well, I mean, it has a much lower barrier to entry, even for people like me who, every time I want to do some serious interaction, I got to reread a tutorial on Mutt, and it's just a pain in the ass. And I would do more kind of drive-by contribution if there were some more WYSIWYG kind of tools. So that's my big difference.
Yeah, so this is a common pain point for email, is that as a first-time contributor, the setup is usually not that easy. You send out your email, and it comes out in the wrong format on the mailing list, and you have to send it again. So this can often be a problem. Peter?
I do think that potentially there is scope for making that better. I mean, for instance, you could have a sort of a dummy contribution email address where it's like, this is my first contribution, so let's not send it to QEMU-devel, let's send it to patch test robot at somewhere, and then it would kind of give you a helpful thing back saying, yeah, it looks like you've got the format basically right here.
So my problem is every 3 months or 4 months, my setup bit rots. It's
Yeah.
like the .mut.rc, the 15 lines of magic runes break or something, and I've got to GPG, whatever. Figure
So-
that crap out.
So that's probably the place where a gateway would be really, really nice. It would allow people to keep their email-based workflows, which have the advantage that you can just tailor it to your personal preferences. And at the same time, if you have some kind of web-based thing which can generate an email or so, it also makes it easier for first-time contributors.
There are many projects which actually face that issue because all the born in the cloud developers are used to some kind of GitHub-like workflow. And sending a patch as an inline text almost always goes wrong for a first time. So I've also seen discussions in the kernel community that actually an attachment might be a better way of allowing a patch as an attachment, because most mailers can actually show inline attachments as normal text, and it would help to get rid of all the white space things. But yeah, I probably have to get used to that. Most new developers are looking into some kind of GitHub-like workflow, and so maybe we have to do something about that. On the other hand, I'm perfectly fine right now with the amount of emails that I get, so it's I can handle that with that, and having to learn basically a new tool or something like that would be hard. Maybe you could also combine. I mean, when you look at the patchwork tool, that basically takes patches from the mailing list, or like Garrett can do that as well, and then you can just click there and say good, not good, and so on. I don't think there's a right answer at the moment that will work for everyone. You will always find somebody who complains.
Okay, so let's move to a different topic. I'm not going to try to interpret this question. I think there's kind of a wide scope. It's up to you guys to decide how you want to address this. What are the peculiarities of developing KVM for a hypervisor, cloud, or hardware vendor?
Well, since I previously worked for IBM and then moved on to Red Hat, I can compare it a bit. If you are working for a hardware vendor, you are very, very focused on that specific kind of hardware, just what SV90 needs, what new interface we have there. Of course, you also need to follow the whole ecosystem there, because otherwise you are just developing something that does not match anything else and does not work with others well. But since I've moved to Red Hat, I have been looking more into other areas, and I think I just get a broader view, and it's probably the same for other hypervisor vendors. They're just not looking at that very specific kind of hardware. Even if it's all Intel, you still look at different varieties of stuff and have different challenges there.
Okay, so that's the hardware vendor and the hypervisor vendor view. What about cloud?
Maybe these go without saying, but I'll say them anyway. It being in a, let's look at the recent spate of vulnerabilities. Like clearly all of the cloud vendors have, you know, they got the disclosures much earlier. Why? Perhaps because they buy more of something. And then, so we have these solutions that we can't talk about for reasons I can't get into, but then like seeing that the upstream isn't at the state of the art of what's kind of been developed by in-house it's just sort of, it's regrettable, I guess. That's, yeah, I think that's a big difference. Nothing peculiar.
Do you have any comments, Wanpeng? Do you have any comments on the cloud perspective? Like what things do you focus on in KVM? What's important to you? What might be different from a hypervisor vendor or hardware vendor?
Okay, actually, we more care about some feature which can improve the scalability and the performance and the high ratio over commit and something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like at scale, when you're managing orders of magnitude more machines, it's being able to get to, so I had a conversation with Paolo a year ago, like, oh, we want some different statistics. Oh, just use eBPF. They're like, I can't do that because it's I don't know, it's a little bit less efficient than having more just some binary stats ready to go. Our focus on live migration, I think we have that in common. That's when I used to work for a hypervisor vendor. It was a little startup. You kind of did what the customers wanted, whereas we know live migration, non-negotiable, has to happen for everything, and so that's like a first-class feature for us. Seems we care about that a lot.
Okay. So we'll stay on the kind of cloud topic, because I think that the contribution, I haven't looked at the history, but I think that the contributions of the cloud providers has increased a lot recently. So this is kind of the same area, but what do you see as the areas that matter, and how do you think this is going to be different from the kind of features and the development we've had before? I mean, scale has already been mentioned. That's definitely one thing which is very important for cloud. What other aspects do you think might be different? I asked a bad question. Any other comments on this?
Think for a minute.
Maybe I can ask a more specific question. Do you use KVM to actually protect container-like cloud instances? I mean,
absolutely. There's I think GKE, I might say for Google Kubernetes, and it's something Kubernetes engine, and that's virtual machines created on Google's cloud running Linux in KVM, and then containers and Docker and all that running on top of it. Yeah. Nested virtualization, yeah. It's interesting. Like we have. I can only speculate as to why we focus on certain things and hypervisor vendors don't. Nested virtualization is a good example. We just had big customers that wanted this, and so then we put a bunch of engineers on it and made a push for it. If Red Hat had some prospective client that wanted higher fidelity nested virtualization, they may well have done the same thing. So I don't think it's inherently a cloud thing.
Do you find your kind of the cloud vendor take on legacy stuff is different from hypervisor VMs? I guess hypervisor vendors are going to care more about things like backwards compatibility with a bunch of older features and things. Maybe you just say we don't have that, we don't care.
That's a good point. We did that for many years. I know a lot. So specific example is we let shadow paging, old school shadow paging, completely bit rot within Google, and we broke it. And then when a year ago or so, we realized that actually, don't quote me on that timeline. When we realized that it was an L1TF mitigation, then oh great, we had all of this tech debt to recover from. But generally, we don't bit rot, or we don't let things bit rot, or we do things with kind of all KVM compatibility in mind, simply because we want to. There are 20 of us, whatever, that work in KVM, and there are 200 or 159 contributors. We want to upstream stuff. We want to remove ourselves from this burden, and we understand that table stakes are maintaining the kind of the correctness and compatibility back to the beginning of time. Now we don't look at anything other than the architectures that we're working on for the hardware that we buy. We don't even do like AMD stuff because we're not selling that. So it's in that respect but we don't try to break things.
Okay, let's move on to a different topic. So there's a question here about KVM Forum and how it's used to get big changes in. KVM Forum is a good way to present new ideas, talk to people, things that can be really hard to do just via email. So what are your thoughts on that? What other ways, because KVM Forum only happens once a year, so what other things can we do? Because certain topics just don't go well via email, but once you get everyone in the room and talking about it, you can actually find a solution. Do you have any experiences with this? Do you have any suggestions about what we should do about it?
Maybe other ways to just get virtually together could also be quite helpful, even if it's just IRC.
Yeah, that's true. IRC does work pretty well. What I find does not work very well is phone and video conferences. We all know this kind of WebEx or whatever kind of technology to use, and it takes much longer than to have the same person in the same room. I don't know if we can maybe just piggyback on other conferences like Plumbers, or I heard that we have a development room for FOSDEM next year. But being in the same room makes such a big difference. With the exception of IRC, but IRC only works if you have met that person before.
So it certainly is the case that if you're in the same room, you can have some much faster conversations and discussions, and there's just a social aspect that it's easier to work with somebody that you've met, that you've kind of had casual conversations with, you've shared a coffee or whatever, and that does help. But the thing that kind of slightly worries me is, well, the people who attend KVM Forum are mostly, I'm guessing most of you have probably been, your company is paying for you to be here, so it privileges the big players in this space, like the distros, the vendors, and the people who are actually doing this as a full-time job. And there's also, certainly in QEMU, there's also a layer of contributors who are doing this basically as a hobby project. They do it on the weekend, they do it in the evening or whatever, and those people are much less likely to be here. So I kind of worry, if we wind up with a convention that, with a sort of a way of working that says, well, you can get the big stuff in, but only if you can manage to come and find us in person, then we're kind of shutting those people out to an even greater extent than we already effectively do. So that's the other side of that.
Actually, I think many guys didn't join the IRC channel, and as you know, the developers are from the world, so we have different time zones. So even if we log in IRC, so we can't, it's not easy to connect closely. So the KVM Forum, we can talk many things face to face. Yes.
Yeah. All right, I mean, one thing I can add is that there is actually a KVM community call, and it's scheduled, I think, once a week or once every 2 weeks. Typically, the agenda for that stays empty, and the call just gets canceled every week. So if people want to use that, Juan Quintela organizes it, I think. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. So it's definitely possible to use that as a forum, either to give kind of a short overview of your idea and the feature you're trying to develop, or purely just to have discussions if you find you're getting stuck on the mailing list. Yeah, so that might be something if you're willing to do the video and audio conferencing, because that's what that's about.
Yeah, maybe also one thing to consider is not only that people are in different time zones, but there are many non-native speakers. And maybe for non-native speakers, it's sometimes easier to do it like in a chat-like environment like IRC because they can write. I don't know, that has been my experience with some people who really felt uncomfortable actually talking English, but were completely fine with writing English.
Okay.
So here, sorry, to your argument, does it make sense to maybe set up something like a KVM Forum stipend for newcomers that they can apply and get a 5C you could just give away?
So the question was basically about whether we could maybe have some sort of stipend, kind of basically travel funding for people to get here. And I think the Linux Foundation does actually have a travel fund for that kind of thing. But there's a limited amount of money, and it could potentially, I would say, if you're taking a week of holiday off work, do you really want to come here in order rather than say, I don't know, go to a nice desert island or...
If you're spending 3 hours every night on doing gaming work, you only want to come here for a week,
yeah, possibly. So I think the issue with this is basically always where do you get the money. So, and as I say, I think the Linux Foundation does have something like that. QEMU as an organisation does not have a huge pot of money, sadly. But yeah, it's kind of worth thinking about. But I think also just sort of making sure that we don't accidentally make this like the only place that you can discuss or get big new features generally accepted. That's kind of what I would. Also, it's like it's once a year. If we wind up with a cadence where you could put a big new thing in once a year, that's a bit slow.
Yeah.
May I suggest that we can do something similar to the KVM call that is once a week or once a month or whatever, but instead of doing it as a video conference, we can open a chat window, and all the relevant KVM maintainers will be there regularly, if it's fine. And then we can discuss big changes like speculation application in this code. Because it will eliminate the fact that some people don't speak English very well or something like that, then it will be, I think, very effective, because sometimes you need to have a very fast discussion without waiting for other things from the menu.
Okay, I mean, yeah, I also think there's very little kind of cross between IRC and email when people send patches to the mailing list. If more discussion is necessary, then I guess it would be possible to notify the mailing list and let interested people know that we're going to have an IRC discussion at a certain time. He wants to get you on the call. Yeah. Okay, so Juan is saying that for the KVM call, he's flexible with the time. If the times are inconvenient, we can change them. But thanks for the comment about IRC.
I think the tool also matters for video and audio. Some of these things you mentioned, WebEx, I have a horrible experience with that. There are better tools.
We don't have enough time to get into this. They're so bad. These tools are so bad. It could fill up a whole hour. But okay, let's stay on a related topic. There's a question here about how to get your new features in. I guess especially if you're a newcomer to the community, what is the approach? Do you send patches first, or do you first send out an email explaining what you'd like to do? What do you guys think? What have you seen work in the past? What are kind of the best practices?
Actually, I think we can post the idea to the mailing list first before the implementation, and then we can get enough comments, and we also can get the whether or not the maintainers prefer the idea. Otherwise, maybe we will waste the time to post the patches which will not be merged. Yeah.
We take the slow and steady approach, I guess. We usually run it in production for like 2 to 5, 6 years, and then decide we should contribute this thing, and then have conversations at conferences like this. But I'm not kidding. This is just what happens. The upside is that we have a defensible patch at that point. So we can say, hey, look, we rewrote 1,000 lines of code, but it improved performance by X, Y, Z, and this is objectively an improvement.
Yeah. So this is about big features, significant new things you're doing. It's not about typo fixes.
Yeah.
You actually made a quite good point. I mean, you test your stuff before you send it out, and this is certainly important. If I get patches and I would apply them, and if they then immediately break things, this doesn't make me happy, obviously. So if you want to do something, if you have patches, they should at least work, or do not break existing things. And I also like to have some kind of too long didn't read introduction that gives me an idea what this is all about. Quite often I see patch series where there was a first version that explained the whole idea, and for some reason I missed that first version, or I didn't have time back then. And then in version 5, that explanation is gone in the cover letter. And if that happens, that's a problem. So always explain, never assume that anybody knows what you're doing, always explain why you're doing it in the cover letter. I think that helps.
Yes, and posting a link to the previous discussion which has a link to the previous version, which points to the discussion 1 month ago, that really helps.
Yeah, one thing also which I would like to tell new contributors, if you are trying to include a new feature and you have tested it in-house and it's working very fine, you must still be prepared that sometimes it will happen, people will look at it upstream and suggest, oh, why don't you just rewrite it like that? And yeah, so it doesn't mean if it's tested and everything looks fine on your side that it will be included in that chain.
So I think one of my suggestions would be that if you want to get in some huge new feature, don't start your interaction with the community with the huge new feature if you can possibly avoid it. If you can start off by doing some smaller stuff, probably some bug fixes, be present in the community and do some review, ideally, then people will pick up an impression that you know what you're doing, that you understand how the software fits together, and then when you come along with your big feature, then you've built up some credit that people will have a look at it and say, okay, this makes sense. So you need to have all the stuff with the cover letter and a good explanation of what your big feature is doing, but it will be much, much easier if you've kind of prepared the ground already and you haven't just popped up as the first thing you've done is submitted a 40-page set to add some huge new thing. So as a concrete example, when I started doing ARM work in QEMU, the first thing we did was basically a bunch of bug fixes to the existing code. All the neon stuff and the floating point emulation was at that time broken. And we basically spent several months just sort of fixing up things, which was a bit of a slog at first, but it got easier. And then when we eventually wound up when the 64-bit ARM support came along and we wanted to add emulation, we were able to get that in quite quickly and without too much fuss because we were already a known quantity in the community. And if we had basically done nothing for the previous couple of years, and then suddenly we come along with, here's a huge patch set adding 64-bit support, that would have been a lot harder.
Okay, thank you. So I'm not sure if this is the best panel for this, but a big topic is the Spectre and Meltdown security issues. So there's a question asking, are the speculative execution flaws, are they hype or are they real? And the amount of development time that needs to be invested in protecting against them, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, they're definitely real. I mean, there's been demonstrated attacks against all of the vulnerabilities of the last couple of years. I think that's self-evident. So I don't know if anybody disagrees with that.
Yeah. So I guess it's asking about the hype and the potential changes that need to be made. The way we write code now, right? When we write conditionals, for example, we don't really think too hard. Oh, what's going to happen with speculative execution? And do I need to add some new guards here and things like that? So obviously, there's a lot of work that will need to go in to actually secure everything. Any thoughts about that?
I think kind of defending against it, like at the C code level, is intractable. It's too hard to. There's. I didn't really know how all this stuff worked until I found out it was all broken and we had to change everything. And I'm like a kernel developer and I write assembly code and all this stuff. So it's just sort of with I think the next lower level of sort of difficulty that we do have to deal with, albeit begrudgingly, is concurrency and like the memory model, and everyone sort of kind of understands that. But now I don't know, this just feels that much harder. And if you have to worry about what something is going to be observing, the side effects of the execution on the microarchitecture, forget about it. So I think tool support. So like the retpoline thing, that was the right way to fix it. If instead if you had to hand code all the indirect jumps or something to confuse the different microarchitectures, we would have gotten that wrong. Secondly, defense in depth seems prudent. Somebody had suggested yesterday after Alex's talk, but what about KPTI for KVM? That's a great idea, because that's, even we're going to screw more stuff up, or we're going to find out that things are broken in more microarchitectures. but that we have more, we'll give the attackers or the vulnerabilities more hoops to jump through. So I think that would be a prudent, those are the two prudent approaches.
But then on the other hand, like traditionally the way to do defense in depth was to do just a bunch of more checks on your inputs, and with Spectre you bypass them all.
I disagree with that characterization. So an analogous example of defense in depth from a different angle is like, and these are things I used to think were silly, like AppArmor or SE Linux or something, where you have these cross-cutting security policies, and you're like, why the hell would I'm not gonna like open devmem as root and do, my libvirt daemon and stomp all over the place because I write good code. But AppArmor is like, well, just in case you mess that up, libvirt is not allowed to open that. That's a good, why not? And so this, I think that's a relevant counterexample.
It's also cross-cut solutions like that. It can give you an additional, not only a blocking layer to defense depth, but also an auditing and detection layer to like, crap, I have millions of systems, but here maybe you should watch what's going on or something like that, which is an additional game to defend against the unknown.
Okay, thank you. So we only have 1 minute left, so let's wrap up with Emacs versus VI.
VI.
No, definitely Emacs.
All the cool people use Emacs.
Well, I use VI, obviously.
What about you? What editor do you use? Do you use Emacs or VI, or do you use a different editor?
VI.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you.
We don't have the budget for workstations that can run Emacs.